Imagine waking up one day and realizing that every single relationship in your life, your family, your friends, your colleagues, was built on a fragile illusion. Not a blatant lie, but something subtler, something more insidious. You begin to notice that the respect people give you feels conditional, brittle, as if it could collapse the moment you stop performing for it. You look at the people closest to you and wonder, do they truly respect me, or do they simply fear losing what I provide? What would it mean if every smile, every nod of approval, every gesture of acknowledgement was not respect at all, but silent calculation? That the praise you've received from peers was not admiration for your essence, but a protective mask worn to keep the social machinery running smoothly. The human heart craves respect in a way that is almost visceral. It is not enough to be liked. It is not enough to be pitied. It is not enough to be tolerated. We yearn for something deeper, the recognition that we carry an inherent weight in the world, that our existence commands acknowledgement beyond utility, beyond fear. But here lies the paradox. The very hunger for respect makes it elusive. The more desperately you chase it, the more it slips through your fingers, leaving you with only fragments of performance, fear, or authority mistaken for reverence. Ask yourself, how many people do you respect without condition? Not because of what they can offer you, not because of their authority over you, but because there is something unshakable about them, something that seems immune to circumstance. Rarely do we find such people, yet secretly, we want to be such a person. But here is the dangerous secret. Most people settle for the counterfeit. They mistake fear for respect, authority for reverence, compliance for admiration. They learn to wield control rather than embody truth. You've seen it before. The boss whose employees obey, but whisper behind their back. The parent whose children comply, but grow up resenting them. The partner who demands loyalty, but breeds silent attachment instead of devotion. At first glance, these people appear powerful, surrounded by nods, agreements, and obedience. But underneath, the structure is hollow, collapsing as soon as the external authority disappears. What remains is not respect, but an aftertaste of resentment. And so the great question emerges, pulsing like a heartbeat you cannot ignore. Is it possible to earn respect without fear? This question is not abstract. It is not academic. It drills into the very marrow of your daily life. Every time you speak, every time you act, every time you reveal yourself to others, this question hovers unseen. Am I respected or merely endured? Do they see me or do they calculate me? But the danger of the question lies not in the answer. The danger lies in realizing that the entire structure of your social existence may already be contaminated by the counterfeit. That the laughter at your jokes, the obedience to your instructions, the admiration for your achievements may not spring from respect at all, but from a subtler form of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of losing advantage. And, if this is true, then what does it say about you, about the life you've been building, about the identity you've been wearing like a suit stitched from borrowed threads? Perhaps you recall a time when you thought someone respected you deep, to discover later that they were motivated by obligation, manipulation, or convenience. The betrayal stung not just because they deceived you, but because the mirror cracked. Was I ever worthy of respect at all? Or was I only standing on a pedestal that fear had built, destined to crumble the moment the scaffolding was pulled away? Respect without fear is the rarest form of power. It is not loud, not forceful, not theatrical. It carries with it a quiet gravity that cannot be imitated. Yet paradoxically, it often looks fragile from the outside until you realize that it endures far longer than control ever could. Fear commands compliance in the short term. Respect without fear inspires loyalty across generations. But here's the haunting twist. To discover how to truly earn respect without fear requires something profoundly uncomfortable. It requires dismantling the illusions we've relied on for validation, peeling away the layers of performance, and confronting the possibility that much of what we've called respect was nothing but fear in disguise. So let me ask again, and let it echo inside you. Do they respect you or do they fear losing you? And if you stripped away every mask, every layer of performance, every tool of authority, would anything remain that others would still respect? This is the knife's edge you now stand upon. On one side lies the comfort of illusion, the counterfeit respect that sustains appearances but corrodes the soul. On the other lies the dangerous path toward respect without fear, a path that demands vulnerability, truth, and a terrifying kind of inner strength. The question is no longer whether you want respect. That part is obvious. The deeper question, the great question, is whether you are willing to endure the cost of discovering the difference. And that, precisely, is where the real story begins. The question still lingers in you, almost uncomfortably. Do they respect me, or do they fear losing me? But to understand why this dilemma exists at all, you must peel back the layers of the human psyche and confront truths that most people spend a lifetime avoiding. Respect, at its core, is not a social construct. It is a mirror. And like any mirror, it reflects back not just how others see you, but how you see yourself. The secret, hidden in plain sight, is that the way others treat you is inseparable from the invisible signals you emit, the posture of your being, the weight of your inner world. But here lies the tragedy. Most people's mirrors are cracked long before they even realize they have one. Carl Jung warned of this fracture when he spoke of the persona, the mask each of us wears to navigate society. The persona is useful, necessary even, but when the mask becomes fused with the face, when we mistake the performance for the self, respect becomes impossible. Others no longer respond to the truth of who we are but to the mask we've glued on. They respect the facade, not the essence, and deep down we know it. That knowledge festers, gnawing at us in the quiet hours of the night. Nietzsche, with his merciless clarity, exposed another layer of the problem. He wrote that most people are not motivated by a love of truth or authenticity, but by the will to power, the primal urge to impose oneself on the world. And what better way to impose oneself than to cultivate fear? Fear works. It bends knees. It silences dissent. It grants a cheap imitation of respect. But Nietzsche also warned that such power is hollow, for it is not grounded in strength of being but in manipulation of weakness. True greatness, he argued, requires the ability to stand without masks, without the scaffolding of fear, and still command acknowledgement. Yet why is it so difficult? Why do so many, perhaps including you, slip into fear-driven respect rather than the authentic kind? Psychology offers an answer. Human beings are wired with survival instincts that favor safety over truth. To the primitive brain, respect is not about dignity, it is about security. If others respect you because they fear you, then in evolutionary terms, you are safe. You are less likely to be attacked, excluded, or abandoned. Fear cloaks you in a shield. Respect without fear, however, offers no such guarantee. It is not built on intimidation but on recognition, and recognition is uncertain. It requires vulnerability. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of suffering, would say this is why most people never find true respect. To strip away the masks, to abandon fear as a weapon, is to open oneself to pain. And humans, he argued, are creatures who will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid suffering. We would rather be falsely respected than risk the humiliation of being seen and rejected as we are. Thus, the counterfeit thrives. But beneath this avoidance lies something even darker. A collective conditioning that teaches us from childhood to equate obedience with respect. Think of your earliest encounters with authority. The teacher who demanded silence. The parent who equated compliance with being good. The unspoken rule that questioning authority was insolence. From the very beginning we were trained not to distinguish between fear and respect. If you obeyed, you were praised. If you resisted, you were shamed. Respect then was coded in our minds not as mutual recognition, but as submission. And this distorted definition calcified as we grew older. The French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote that hell is other people, not because others are inherently cruel, but because in their gaze we lose ourselves. We are reduced to the object they perceive, stripped of our inner freedom. And if we have been trained to equate respect with obedience, then in the eyes of others we are always performing, always bending, always shrinking. No wonder the respect we crave feels counterfeit. It was built on submission from the beginning. Aldous Huxley, in his dystopian Foresight, warned of societies where people would be conditioned to love their servitude. Respect in such a world becomes irrelevant, replaced by conformity masked as harmony. People no longer seek respect without fear. They seek comfort without dignity. And here lies the most chilling realization. Perhaps the reason authentic respect feels so rare is not because others refuse to give it, but because most of us have. What stopped demanding it? We settle for the counterfeit because it feels safer, but safety comes at a cost. When your life is built on counterfeit respect, your identity becomes parasitic. It feeds on others' fear, others' compliance, others' silence, and when the silence breaks, when the mask slips, you are left with nothing. This is why so many powerful figures collapse into despair once their authority crumbles. They mistake obedience for respect, and when obedience vanishes, their soul finds itself naked, unacknowledged, and unmoored. Viktor Frankl, who endured the unspeakable horrors of the concentration camps, discovered a different truth. He observed that even in the most dehumanizing conditions, some individuals carried a presence that could not be extinguished. They commanded respect without demanding it, even from fellow prisoners, even from guards. How? Because their dignity did not depend on masks or authority. It radiated from the core of their being, from a meaning that could not be stripped away. This points to the root of the hidden problem. We confuse respect with control because we have not yet confronted the void within ourselves. We seek validation from others because we have not yet validated ourselves. We use fear as a weapon because we fear the unbearable possibility that, without it, no one would care to acknowledge us at all. And so the question deepens. If respect, without fear, begins with inner integrity, then why do so few find it? Perhaps because to face the void within is to undergo a kind of death. The death of the persona, the death of the illusion, the death of the counterfeit. And death terrifies us, so we compromise, clinging to the easiest substitute of fear-driven respect, even as it corrodes our soul. But compromise cannot hold forever, and when it breaks, the consequences reach further than most realize. You may think the distinction between respect and fear is subtle, perhaps even semantic, but look closer and you'll see it's not subtle at all. The consequences of confusing the two are everywhere woven into the personal struggles of individuals, the fractures of families, the dysfunction of corporations, and the decay of entire societies. Start with the most intimate level, the self. When you live on counterfeit respect, you live on constant alert. You must always perform, always calculate, always maintain the image that keeps others deferential. You cannot rest, because rest would mean exposure. And so you become two people, the one the world sees and the one hidden beneath. Over time, this split corrodes you from within. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance, the psychological tension that arises when your outward actions do not align with your inner truth. The longer this dissonance persists, the heavier it becomes, pressing down until you can hardly breathe. But it doesn't stop there. Fear-driven respect distorts relationships in ways so subtle that you may not even notice the damage until years have passed. Consider the parent who rules through intimidation. On the surface, they appear respected. The children obey. The household runs smoothly. The parent's word carries weight. But beneath the surface, a hidden seed is planted, a seed of resentment that grows quietly, year by year. By the time the children reach adulthood, they may still comply out of habit, but their hearts have drifted far away. What appeared to be respect was merely fear waiting for its expiration date. Now consider the workplace. A leader who relies on fear may achieve immediate compliance. Deadlines are met, rules are followed, the hierarchy holds. But at what cost? Fear stifles creativity, poisons trust, and silences innovation. Employees do what is necessary to survive, nothing more. They give their labor but withhold their spirit. They nod in meetings but plot their exit in private. The organization becomes a hollow shell, efficient perhaps, but lifeless. Respect without fear, on the other hand, ignites a different energy, devotion, the willingness to go beyond duty. Yet few leaders ever reach for this higher form because fear is faster, easier, more tangible. It feels like control, and control is seductive. But perhaps the most devastating consequences appear on the societal level. History is littered with regimes, institutions, and ideologies that thrived on counterfeit respect, fear disguised as reverence. They seemed unshakable for decades, even centuries, until one day they crumbled almost overnight. Why? Because beneath the surface, loyalty was an illusion. When the fear lifted, so did the obedience, and what remained was collapse. The Roman Empire, the Soviet Union, corporations that appeared invincible before dissolving in scandal, all of them mistook fear for respect, authority for reverence, and in the end, they paid the price. On a neurological level, the trap becomes even clearer. The brain is wired to detect threats. When you command fear, people's amygdala of the brain's fear center activates. They enter survival mode, narrowing their focus, suppressing curiosity, silencing dissent. You gain compliance, yes, but you lose the very qualities that make humans thrive: imagination, trust, connection. Respect without fear, however, activates an entirely different circuit. It engages the prefrontal cortex, part of the brain responsible for higher reasoning, empathy, and long-term decision. In other words, fear makes people small. Respect makes them expansive. Which, then, would you prefer to inspire? And yet, here is the cruel paradox. Even when people see these consequences, they continue down the same path. Why? Because fear works now. Respect without fear requires patience. It requires enduring uncertainty, vulnerability, and the terrifying possibility of rejection. Most people would rather have shallow certainty today than risk deep recognition tomorrow. So they settle, they compromise, and slowly, the compromise becomes a prison. Think about your own life. How many of your relationships have been shaped by this compromise? How often have you hidden your true thoughts because you feared they might cost you approval? How often have you maintained a persona to ensure that others respected you, even though you knew, deep down, it wasn't real? Each time you did, the counterfeit took root, and the longer it stayed, the harder it became to imagine another way. This is where the unseen consequence becomes most dangerous. It doesn't just shape relationships, organizations, or societies, it shapes identity. When you live too long in the counterfeit, you forget there is anything beyond it. Respect becomes normal. You no longer even question it. And when someone enters your life who commands true respect without fear, you may not even recognize it. Their quiet strength unsettles you. Their authenticity feels almost alien. Instead of learning from them, you may resist them, because their very existence exposes the hollowness of your own foundation. And so the cycle continues. Parents pass it to children. Leaders pass it to employees. Cultures pass it to generations. Fear masquerades as respect, and humanity forgets there was ever another way. But forgetting does not erase the truth. The consequences remain, whispering in the cracks of broken families, failed leaders, and crumbled institutions. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the whisper in your own life too. The subtle ache when you realize someone obeys you but doesn't admire you. The quiet despair when you recognize that people nod at your words but don't truly hear you. The the hollowness that creeps in when the applause fades, leaving silence where respect should have been. This is the price of the counterfeit, and it is a price that grows heavier with time. Yet paradoxically, these consequences, painful as they are, also contain the seed of rebellion. For once you see the counterfeit clearly, you can no longer live comfortably within it. The mask begins to suffocate, the fear begins to rot, and a dangerous thought begins to take root. What if there is another way? What if respect without fear is not only possible, but necessary? This thought is the spark, and once lit, it demands to grow. The moment of rebellion begins not with action, but with recognition. The moment you finally whisper to yourself, "I can no longer live like this." You see the counterfeit clearly, you feel its poison in your veins, and suddenly, compliance becomes unbearable. That is where freedom begins. But breaking free is not as simple as discarding the mask and demanding authentic respect. If it were that easy, everyone would have done it already. The rebellion is radical precisely because it overturns the very instincts you have been conditioned to obey. It is not about adding another performance, it is about dismantling the performances. Altogether, to earn respect without fear, you must first be willing to lose it. This is the paradox that frightens most people into silence. Imagine stripping away every layer of intimidation, manipulation, or performance, until only your raw self remains. Imagine standing before others without armor, without camouflage, without control. The possibility of rejection looms like a storm. But here is the secret. The very act of standing unguarded is what creates the gravity of true respect. For when others see that you do not need their approval to exist fully, they recognize a power deeper than authority. They recognize freedom. History offers us countless rebels who embodied this truth. Socrates, who stood before the Athenian court, refusing to betray his principles even as they condemned him to death. Gandhi, who wielded no weapon but his own steadfastness, confronting an empire without fear. Nelson Mandela, who emerged from decades of imprisonment not with vengeance but with dignity that commanded the world's admiration. These figures were not feared, they were respected. Their rebellion lay in refusing to play the counterfeit game at all. But rebellion does not require historical stage or public spotlight. It can begin in the smallest spaces in a family, a friendship, a workplace. Imagine refusing to manipulate a friend into loyalty, and instead allowing them the freedom to walk away. Imagine leading a team not by intimidation but by embodying the values you wish them to follow. Imagine daring to speak your truth, even when it risks disapproval. Each act may feel like a death, yet each death births a new kind of respect, the kind that cannot be revoked by fear. Psychologically, this rebellion is nothing less than a rewiring of the mind. For years, your nervous system has been trained to equate control with safety. To break free, you must train yourself to tolerate the discomfort of vulnerability. This means entering the moments where fear urges you to control and choosing instead to release. It means noticing the panic when someone resists you and breathing through it rather than tightening your grip. Over time, your body learns a new truth, that safety does not come from fear-driven respect, but from an inner stability no one can take away. Philosophically, the rebellion requires confronting the existential void that fear has been masking. Sartre would call this the embrace of freedom, the terrifying recognition that you are not bound by others' perceptions, but condemned to choose your own essence. At first, this freedom feels like vertigo, like standing on the edge of an abyss. But if you endure it, you discover something extraordinary. Once you stop depending on fear for respect, you no longer need the counterfeit at all. You discover that respect flows not from others' submission, but from your authenticity. Yet beware, the rebellion will not make you universally admired. In fact, it may provoke hostility. Those who live by the counterfeit will resent you for exposing their game. Your authenticity will unsettle them, for it highlights the hollowness of their masks. Some may even try to shame you back into conformity. This resistance is the test. If you endure it, you prove to yourself that you no longer depend on counterfeit respect. If you retreat, the cycle begins anew. So how do you endure? By anchoring yourself in meaning. Viktor Frankl discovered that human beings can withstand almost any suffering if they have a why. To break free from counterfeit respect, you must discover your why, the truth you value more than approval, more than compliance, more than fear. For Socrates, it was philosophy. For Gandhi, it was justice. For you, it may be integrity, love, creativity, or truth itself. Once you know your why, you can face rejection without collapsing. You no longer need others' fear to feel whole. And here lies the most liberating discovery. Once you stop needing fear, you begin radiating a different energy. People sense it, they lean toward it. They respect it not because they are forced to, but because they cannot help it. Authenticity has a gravity of its own. It does not coerce, it attracts. It does not demand, it inspires. It is quieter than fear, but infinitely stronger. This, then, is the rebellion. To dismantle the counterfeit, endure the void, anchor yourself in meaning, and allow authenticity to replace performance. It is a rebellion against your own conditioning, your own instincts, your own history. And once you begin, there is no going back. For once you taste respect without fear, the counterfeit will forever feel hollow. And yet, this rebellion is not the end. It is only the threshold. For once you begin to break free, you must confront the final, most unsettling truth. That respect without fear is not merely a way of relating to others, but a way of being in the world itself. And to step fully into it requires a realization so profound that it redefines reality itself. The final, most powerful realization: imagine you have torn away every mask. Imagine you have endured the silence after walking away from counterfeit respect. Imagine you have stood unarmored before others and felt the sting of their rejection, the weight of their misunderstanding, and yet you remain. You have not crumbled, you have not vanished. You have discovered something terrifying and beautiful, that respect without fear begins not in the eyes of others, but in the core of your own being. This is the ultimate truth. You cannot earn true respect until you first respect yourself without fear. And here lies the deepest paradox of all. The thing you were desperately chasing from others was always meant to be born within you. The approval you begged for, the recognition you craved, the nods and applause you mistook for respect, all of it was a reflection of your own inner fracture. Once you heal that fracture, once you learn to stand before yourself without masks, without intimidation, without conditions, you discover that respect flows outward naturally, like light from a flame that does not ask permission to burn. Consider what this means. If you respect yourself only when others approve, then your respect is conditional, fragile, counterfeit. But if you can stand in solitude, stripped of all validation, and still feel the gravity of your own existence, then you have reached the bedrock upon which authentic respect is built. Nietzsche once declared, "Become who you are." Most read this as a call to self-expression, but in truth it is more radical. It is an invitation to annihilate everything false until only the indestructible core remains. To become who you are is not to create a persona, but to strip away every mask until you no longer fear yourself. That is the foundation of respect. For if you no longer fear yourself, why would you need others to fear you? This realization transforms everything. Relationships shift. You no longer demand submission to feel acknowledged. You can allow others to disagree, even to walk away, without collapsing. Their rejection no longer feels like annihilation, because you no longer outsource your respect to them. Instead, you stand as an equal, inviting connection, not enforcing it. And paradoxically, this freedom makes others respect you more deeply than fear ever could. Leadership transforms as well. A leader who respects themselves without fear no longer needs to dominate or manipulate. Their presence alone inspires trust, because others sense they are not being used as pawns in someone else's performance. They follow not out of intimidation but out of devotion. This is why the greatest leaders in history are remembered not for their ability to instill fear, but for their ability to embody authenticity so profoundly that others willingly gave their loyalty. Even society transforms under this truth. For if individuals learn to respect themselves without fear, they cannot be ruled by counterfeit authority. Tyrannies collapse, manipulations lose their grip, and cultures rooted in fear begin to wither. Respect without fear becomes not just a personal rebellion, but a revolution of civilization itself. But let us return to you, because this truth is not meant to remain abstract or historical. It is meant to pierce your own life, here and now. Ask yourself, do you truly respect yourself without fear? Or is your self-respect still conditional, contingent upon achievement, approval, compliance, performance? Do you stand before yourself freely, or do you cower even from your own gaze, hiding behind the masks you show the world? The ultimate truth demands a choice. Will you continue feeding on counterfeit respect, knowing its hollowness, fearing the silence that comes without it? Or will you risk everything to build the kind of respect that endures, starting from within? This choice is not comfortable. It is not easy. It is in fact terrifying. But it is also liberating beyond measure. For once you truly commit to respecting yourself without fear, you discover a power that cannot be taken away. You can lose status, approval, relationships, even authority, but the respect remains because it no longer depends on anything outside of you. And here lies the final revelation. Respect without fear is not something you earn from others. It is something you radiate. It flows outward as naturally as breath. People sense it. They cannot help but respond. Some will resent it, yes, but others will be drawn to it, changed by it, inspired by it. And these are the people who will remain, the ones whose respect is real, enduring, unshakable. So imagine this. You walk into a room no longer needing to perform. You speak without calculating approval. You lead without demanding obedience. You love without manipulating loyalty. You exist without masks. At first the silence is deafening, but then something happens. People begin to lean toward you not because they fear you, but because they sense something rare, something luminous, a human being who respects themselves without fear, and therefore can respect others in the same way. This is the dangerous secret to earning respect without fear. It is dangerous because it demands the death of illusion. It demands the courage to walk through rejection, to endure the void, to risk solitude. But it is also the secret that transforms everything. For once you embody it, you no longer chase respect, you become its source. And so the final question is not whether others respect you or whether they fear you. The final question is this: will you dare to respect yourself without fear? For if you do, you will no longer be haunted by the counterfeit. You will no longer mistake obedience for admiration, compliance for loyalty, performance for presence. You will have discovered the ultimate truth that respect without fear is not something you beg for, manipulate for, or demand. It is the echo of a soul that has finally come home to itself. So step forward, strip away the mask, stand in your own gravity. The world does not need more performers, manipulators, or counterfeit authorities. The world needs those who embody the rare, unshakable presence of respect without fear, and perhaps you are ready to be one of them.